What's a little thing that someone did for you and probably forgot about it right away, but you remember it years later? One time I was in the summer school class and I became friends with two girls in the class. Once for a whole week they were purposefully ignoring me and I felt hurt. When I went to confront them, they surprised me with a poster board covered in magazine cutouts that spelled my name and had pictures of things I was interested in. Pictures of my characteristics and theirs too. They had been secretly working on it the whole time. Almost 20 years later I still have it somewhere. This reminds me of something my friends did for me. There was a lot going on with my family and was pretty sad. Then I noticed some of my friends not being around me during breaks. I later found them in the hallway and they immediately changed the subject, me thinking I was left out. Later we got a biology assignment and I teamed up with my friend and decided on a date to work on it at her house. Suddenly all my friends were at her house with cake. They all worked together to have a surprise party for me. They even contacted the teacher and whole class for that fake assignment. It was nothing big, but it meant so much to me while I was having a difficult time. The little jar of good luck they gave me that day still sits on my desk years later. I'm a 33-year-old man and I just audibly went oof with emotion, like when my mother sees a video of a kitten being rescued by a firefighter. I was 7 years old and I was riding the bus with my mother. She was a horribly abusive mother and she was yelling and screaming at me about something I can no longer remember. The woman sitting across the bus from us was staring at my mom with her mouth open and look of shock in her eyes. That one tiny moment let me know that what was happening to me wasn't normal. It helped to start me down the path of understanding that my mother was the one with the problem, not me. That woman on the bus probably forgot about the whole thing by the time she went to bed that night, but that brief moment is still precious to me 44 years later. I'll bet the woman on the bus remembers. I would. Way back in I think first grade, a couple of guys in my class started picking on me because my shoes weren't the cool ones. The popular guy stood up for me saying if they are comfortable for him, why does it matter? Something very small, but for some reason it still sticks out to me. My story is somewhat similar. I had a tough childhood and some of the ways it showcased itself impacted me socially. In middle school I was so shy that I would sometimes come home hoarse from not talking all day. I was terribly anxious. We were also not doing well financially at that point, so my clothes were cheap and ill-fitting, during a time period and in a location where brand was everything. I was bullied mercilessly. Lunch was the worst, and because we could only sit four to a table for some reason, I often sat alone, barely lingering on the edges of conversations of kids nice enough to let me linger. One day during lunch 3 girls at a table of 4 started teasing me about my pants being rolled up, where's the flood kind of stuff that shouldn't have been a big deal but was piercing to me at that time. I froze and my mind immediately blanked and I just felt like crumpling. I was so anxious and hurt that I couldn't even figure out what they were talking about. But the 4th girl got up from the table, walked over, smiled and just said something like your pants are rolled up and then knelt down to unroll them. It was a simple act of kindness, but she pushed against her friends and reached out to me and it's always stuck with me. I reached out to her on Facebook several years ago and, without going into the whole story, just thanked her for always being so nice to me during a time when many people weren't and I needed it most. We aren't friends now or anything, but she's always been a wonderful person who stays in my mind's periphery. As a teen, I didn't know how to read the bus schedule. I took the wrong bus and ended up in an unfamiliar neighborhood. I was super lost, overwhelmed, and trying not to panic. A tiny, elderly black lady in a giant hat saw me freaking out. She told me to take some deep breaths until I wasn't on the verge of tears, then taught me how to read the bus schedule. She told me which buses I needed to take to get back where I was going. I'm sure she didn't think anything about it, but I still appreciate what she did for me that day. When I was in the hospital teetering on the edge of dying and brain damage, my friend Laura would just sit there holding my hand. It's amazing I remember that at all because I don't remember anything else. Don't leave us hanging. Did you die? Sadly yes, but he lived. 30 years ago when I was 17, my friend and I went over to a classmate's house and saw her hug her dad. Up until that moment, I had no conscious knowledge that kids existed who loved their parents. Or that parents could be loving to their children. That moment changed the way I saw the world and always stuck with me when I became a father. There weren't very many days when I was raising my own daughter that moment didn't come to mind. That classmate was universally loved and tragically died young from cancer. So I never got to tell her what she'd done for me. I did make it a point to hunt down her dad, tell him the story, and thank him. Without witnessing that, my entire adult life would have been dramatically different. Years ago my sister taught me the value of telling a parent that they are good at parenting, even if they are a stranger. My sister's best friend died. My sister had only briefly ever met her friend's mother. Regardless, when she saw her at the funeral, my sister handed the mother a long letter about what an amazing person her daughter was, and that's how she knew how wonderful a mom she had been. It was my sophomore year and we had had 4 different math teachers that year, and then never the same sub twice after that. I had an F and I was freaking out because it's $75 to make up a credit. Anyways, a random math teacher in the same building started doing our lessons but not actually teaching us. She noticed I was failing and did everything she could to help me, but we still didn't know if I would pass. She didn't do final grades. The last day of school she came and banged on the window of the class I was in and mouthed, "You passed," holding up my paper. It made me so happy she came to tell me. It was no big deal and she probably doesn't remember me at all, but I'll never forget it. She remembers. I was in high school and there was some big test I needed to take for a class. My mom didn't like letting me miss school under any circumstances, including immediately after kidney surgery, so she made me go and take this test. I barely remember the test itself, but when I was done I just curled into a fetal position and shivered because I felt so cold. A guy who sat next to me got up and put his coat over me. Didn't say a word. Just gave me his coat and sat back down. I'm pretty sure his name was Frederick, but I don't know his last name and I don't think I knew it then. I have no idea where he is now, but I bet he grew up splendidly. Holy Mother God. Tests can be rescheduled. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Schools definitely make special arrangements for extremely unusual circumstances. I hope you're in a better place, and that the kidney surgery helped make your life better. I was in high school speech class. I've never been great at public speaking, supercharged social anxiety, so when we had to do a presentation, I was a nervous wreck. I chose tiger endangerment, and since we had to use props I made a pie chart. The class was less than impressed. One girl who didn't like me for some reason actually heckled me. This one guy who presented after I did gave a hilarious speech about how excited he was to go to college and pledge the frat that his older brother was in. The whole class was cracking up. When he was done, he walked past me to go back to his seat, and he leaned in and said, "I thought yours was better." A few years ago my wife and I had a tire blowout. We were stranded and didn't have any money. A stranger paid for a new tire just because they could. I was about 8 years old and in the French Alps on a skiing trip. My parents didn't want to get saddled with me and my sister, so put us in ski school. The class were skiing down a run when my ski got caught on something and fell down and got turned around. I couldn't get up off the floor without sliding backwards down the run, which ended in a sheer drop off the side of the mountain. Basically I was stuck and the ski school had continued down the mountain, not noticing they were a child down. I was stuck there for so long crying while everyone on the slope continued past me until one French snowboarder in his early 20s stopped to help me. Couldn't understand a word he said, but he picked me up off the floor, turned me round and helped me on my way. Guy probably forgot about it that night, but 20 or so years later and I can still remember clear as day. I had a miscarriage and was devastated. It was after I had already been showing in my pregnancy, so everyone knew. I was at my parents' house and they had some guests over. When I came out of my room, all the guests got really quiet and didn't know what to say, so they all looked away and no one said anything. Except one guy, a family friend, who came right up to me and said, "I'm sorry for your loss." He probably doesn't remember it, but I knew it took courage for him to do that, and it meant so much to me to have someone acknowledge my loss. Even though this was more than 10 years ago, I'm choking up as I write it. I thankfully have my beautiful children now, but I think about my miscarriages from time to time and still get emotional. It also taught me that you don't need to say anything special, just acknowledging what someone is going through makes a huge impact. Before, I would have been like the others and not said anything because that's so much easier, and also because you know you won't say the wrong thing. But since then I will always reach out, even if it's awkward or uncomfortable. When I went back to work last year after my second miscarriage, a co-worker who really didn't like me came over and hugged me. She held me so tight. It meant so much to me because no one wanted to acknowledge my pain. I am now 22 weeks pregnant with my rainbow baby. Back in high school, my boyfriend's dad told me that my smile was joy personified and never let anyone convince me otherwise. That relationship lasted maybe a month, but that man's sternly heartfelt compliment has stuck with me for 20 years. English is my second language, and for some reason, in my first year of middle school in America, barely able to speak any English, I decided to try out for cheerleading. I didn't get selected and was therefore crushed, and my ESL teacher must have picked up on this because she came over to me and said, "Don't be sad, today you did something that nobody in my class has ever done. Now go find something else, otherwise there's always next year." Being encouraged by her words, I went on to try out for volleyball, basketball, and track. At the end of that year I invited her to the sports awards ceremony where I picked up an MVP trophy for both basketball and volleyball. It was the best thing she could have said to me. Thank you for watching my video. Consider liking and subscribing, and make sure your kitty's food bowl has been shaken up recently. Have a nice day.